Welcome to our deep dive into Staring at the Sun.
By Irvin Yalom.
That's right.
Yeah.
Irvin Yalom's book, Staring at the Sun, will be exploring his ideas on facing mortality and how that can actually lead to a more fulfilling life.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a paradox, right?
It is, and that's what makes Yalom's work so compelling.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from these big
Right.
existential questions.
Yeah.
In fact, he dives right in, starting with the idea that death anxiety is a universal human experience.
So we're not alone in feeling this way.
Not at all. Yalom argues that it doesn't matter your age, background, or even how much you try to avoid thinking about it.
Right.
Death is something we all grapple with.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better already knowing it's not just me.
Sure.
But how does Yalom suggest we approach this fear?
Yeah.
It's not exactly something you can just ignore.
He actually encourages us to confront it.
Okay.
He uses the example of Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol to illustrate this point.
Oh, yeah.
Think about Scrooge's transformation. Okay. It wasn't just about getting into the holiday spirit.
Right.
It was about coming face to face with his own mortality.
I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. It's like that near-death experience forced him to reevaluate his priorities and how he was living his life.
Exactly. Yalom argues that confronting our mortality, even if it's uncomfortable, can be a catalyst for living more intentionally and appreciating the present moment more fully.
But death anxiety isn't always so obvious, is it? Yalom talks about something called hidden death anxiety. What exactly does that mean?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Hidden death anxiety refers to the ways our fear of death can manifest in more subtle, disguised forms. It might show up as general anxiety, relationship problems, or even an obsession with work or success.
Okay.
Yalom gives the example of a woman named Susan, who was consumed with anxiety about her son through therapy. They uncovered that her worries were actually rooted in her own fears about aging and mortality.
Wow, that's insightful. It makes you wonder how many of our everyday anxieties might be tied back to this underlying fear of death.
Right.
But if it's so hidden, how do we even recognize it?
That's where self-reflection and perhaps even therapy can be helpful.
Okay.
It's about paying attention to those recurring anxieties.
Yeah.
And asking ourselves, what's the root of this fear? Is there something bigger I'm avoiding?
So we're starting to see that acknowledging our fear of death is important.
Yes.
But how do we actually move past that fear and live a life that's not overshadowed by it?
Yeah.
I know Yalom introduces the ideas of an ancient Greek philosopher named Epicurus.
Yes.
What did he have to say about all of this?
Epicurus had some radical ideas for his time.
Okay.
And they're surprisingly relevant today.
Okay.
He believed that death is nothing to us.
Okay.
Because when we die, our consciousness simply ceases to exist.
Yeah.
There's no heaven, no hell, no afterlife.
Okay.
Just nothingness.
So he's saying we shouldn't fear death because we won't actually experience it.
That's right.
It'll be like, like before we were born, we weren't around to experience that.
Right.
So why fear the time after we're gone?
That's the essence of his argument. And he goes even further with what he calls the argument of symmetry.
Okay.
Our state after death is the same as our state before birth, non-existence.
Okay.
So if we don't fear the time before we were born, why fear the time after we die?
I can see how that could be comforting, but it also feels a bit, well, bleak.
Sure.
If there's nothing after this life, does that mean our lives are meaningless?
That's a common response.
Yeah.
And it's where Yalom's ideas about rippling come in.
Okay.
He argues that our lives do have meaning.
Okay.
Not because of some grand afterlife, but because of the impact we have on others.
Okay.
He uses the analogy of a stone dropped in a pond. The ripples continue outward long after the stone has sunk.
So our actions, our relationships, the way we touch other people's lives.
Yes.
Those are the ripples that continue outward even after we're gone.
Precisely. And that brings us to an important point.
Okay.
Yalom argues that connecting with others, contributing to something larger than ourselves, and leaving a positive mark on the world are powerful antidotes to the fear of death.
Yeah.
It's not about achieving some kind of immortality.
Right.
It's about recognizing that our lives have meaning because of the connections we forge.
Yeah.
And the impact we have on the world around us.
So instead of fearing death, we can choose to focus on living a life that creates those ripples.
Exactly.
The life that matters.
Exactly. And this is just the beginning of our exploration of Yalom's insights.
Oh, good.
There's so much more to unpack about how we can live a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling in the face of our own mortality.
You know, one of the things I appreciate about Yalom is that he doesn't just present these big philosophical ideas in a vacuum.
Right.
He brings them down to earth with examples from his own life and his work as a therapist.
Absolutely. Yalom is a master at weaving together theory, personal experience, and clinical practice.
Right.
And in staring at the sun, he even offers some practical advice for therapists.
Okay.
And really anyone.
Okay.
On how to deal with death anxiety.
Okay, so what kind of advice does he give? I'm all ears.
Well, he emphasizes the importance of open and honest communication.
Okay.
He encourages therapists to create a safe space where patients can talk about their fears and anxieties without judgment.
Right.
And here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
He actually advocates for therapists to be vulnerable themselves.
Vulnerable. You mean like sharing their own fears about death?
Yes, exactly. Yalom believes that self-disclosure on the part of the therapist can actually be incredibly therapeutic.
I'm not sure I understand. Wouldn't that shift the focus away from the patient?
Not necessarily. Yalom argues that when therapists are willing to share their own struggles, it creates a sense of shared humanity.
A feeling of, we're in this together.
Okay.
It can help patients feel less alone in their fears and more connected to their therapist.
I see. It's about building trust and creating a more authentic relationship.
Yeah.
So it's not just about what the therapist says, but about who they are as a person.
That's a great way to put it. And another key piece of advice Yalom offers is to focus on the here and now.
Okay.
He encourages therapists, and all of us, really, to pay attention to the present moment rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
It sounds like mindfulness in a way. Being fully present in each moment and appreciating what we have right now.
It is very much in line with mindfulness practices.
Yeah.
And Yalom also talks about the power of dreams in therapy.
Interesting.
He sees them as a window into the unconscious, a way to access fears and desires that we might not be fully aware of in our waking lives.
I've always been fascinated by dreams. They can be so strange and vivid.
But also incredibly insightful. Can you give us an example of how Yalom uses dreams in his therapy?
He describes a patient named Mark,
Okay.
who had recurring nightmares about his sister's death. Through exploring these dreams, Mark was able to confront his deep-seated fears about loss and abandonment, which ultimately helped him move forward in his life.
So dreams can be scary, but they can also be a valuable tool for understanding ourselves better.
Yes.
And facing those hidden anxieties we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of anxieties, I think it's important to remember that even Yalom, this expert on death anxiety, admits to having his own fears. He shares some deeply personal stories in the book about the loss of his cat as a child.
Oh, wow.
Witnessing his father's death and even his own anxieties about leaving his wife behind.
That's actually really comforting to hear. It makes him feel more human, more relatable.
Right.
It's like he's saying, hey, I'm scared too, but we can face this together.
Exactly. And that vulnerability is what makes his work so powerful.
Yeah.
He's not preaching from some ivory tower.
Yeah.
He's sharing his own journey, his own struggles, and ultimately his own search for meaning in the face of death.
Okay, so we've talked about acknowledging our fears.
Yes.
Confronting them, and even using them as a catalyst for growth.
Right.
But what about the big question? How do we find solace in the face of our own mortality?
Right.
Does Yalom offer any answers there?
He does, and it might surprise you.
Okay.
But he finds comfort in the idea that death is simply the cessation of consciousness.
Okay.
He believes that when we die, there's no fear, no pain, no grief.
Okay.
Because our awareness simply ends.
So it's not about some kind of blissful afterlife or reincarnation.
Right.
It's about the simple fact that we will no longer exist. I guess in a way that could be a comfort. No more suffering, no more worries.
That's how Yalom sees it. And he also finds comfort in the idea of rippling. The idea that our actions and relationships create these lasting impacts on others, even after we're gone.
It's like that saying, the best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart.
Yes.
Or how about, what we have done for ourselves alone dies with us, what we have done for others, and the world remains and is immortal.
Yeah.
These quotes make me think about teachers, mentors, artists.
Right.
Their work continues to influence and inspire people long after they're gone.
That's exactly the point. Yalom even shares the story of Barbara.
Okay.
A teacher who finds comfort in knowing that her teachings continue to ripple through the lives of her former students. It's a powerful reminder that our lives have meaning,
Yeah.
Not just because of what we achieve for ourselves,
right.
but because of the connections we make and the impact we have on others.
It strikes me that we've been talking about death quite a bit.
Yeah.
And yet this conversation doesn't feel morbid at all.
Right.
If anything, it feels kind of liberating.
I think that's one of the remarkable things about Yalom's approach.
Yeah.
By facing our mortality head on, we can actually free ourselves from the grip of fear and anxiety.
Okay.
It allows us to live more fully in the present and appreciate the preciousness of life.
It's like he's saying, instead of letting death loom over us like this big, scary shadow,
Right.
we can choose to acknowledge it, understand it, and even find a sense of peace with it.
Exactly. And that peace doesn't come from denying death, but from integrating it into our understanding of life. It's about recognizing that death is a natural part of the cycle, the inevitable counterpoint to birth.
I'm also curious about Yalom's decision to write a book specifically about death.
Yeah.
It seems like a bold choice for a therapist who could have easily focused on other aspects of human experience.
Sure.
What do you think motivated him to tackle this topic so directly?
Well, in the final chapter, Yalom reflects on his own motivations for writing Staring at the Sun.
Okay.
He talks about how the process of writing itself was a way for him to confront his own mortality.
Okay.
To grapple with these big questions in a way that felt both personal and universal.
So it wasn't just about sharing his knowledge with others.
Right.
It was about working through his own anxieties and fears through the act of writing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important lesson for all of us.
Yeah.
Facing death, whether through writing therapy or simple contemplation, can be a profoundly life-giving experience.
Right.
It's not about becoming obsessed with death, but about using our awareness of it to fuel a more meaningful and fulfilling existence.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Staring at the Sun, what are some key takeaways that you think our listener should walk away with?
First and foremost, I think it's important to remember that death anxiety is a universal experience.
Okay.
We all grapple with these fears, and that's perfectly normal.
Right.
There's no shame in feeling anxious or uncertain about death.
It's like Yalom is giving us permission to talk about death, to normalize these conversations that we often shy away from.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think Yalom's exploration of Epicurus's philosophy provides a powerful framework for reframing our relationship with death.
Okay.
It's not about denying death or pretending it doesn't exist, but about understanding that it's not something we need to fear.
We can choose to spend our lives worrying about something we won't even experience.
Right.
Or we can choose to focus on living fully in the present moment.
And that leads to the third takeaway.
Okay.
The importance of connection. Yalom emphasizes how relationships, love, and empathy can help us cope with our fears and find meaning in life.
Yeah.
It's not about isolating ourselves in our anxiety, but about reaching out to others, sharing our vulnerabilities, and creating those ripples that extend beyond our own lifespan.
It's about recognizing that we're not alone in this journey.
Exactly.
And that our connections with others can provide comfort, meaning, and even a sense of transcendence in the face of our own mortality.
Exactly. And finally, I think it's essential to remember that facing death, whether through therapy writing or simple contemplation, can actually be a catalyst for personal growth and a more fulfilling life.
Yeah.
It's about looking directly at death, not with dread, but with curiosity and a willingness to learn from it.
And in doing so, we might just discover a deeper appreciation for life itself, for the beauty of the present moment, and for the profound connections we share with others.
Yeah.
So as we end this deep dive into Staring at the Sun, we want to leave you with a thought-provoking question inspired by Yalom's concept of rippling. What kind of ripples do you want to leave behind?
That's a good question.
What actions can you take today to make a positive impact that extends beyond your own life?
Remember, every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every moment of genuine connection creates a ripple that spreads outward, touching others in ways you may never fully know.
And that's the power of living a meaningful life. It's not just about the time we have on this earth, but about the impact we make, the love we share, and the legacy we leave behind. If you're interested in exploring these ideas further, we highly encourage you to check out Irvin Yalom's Staring at the Sun. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
And as always, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.